perks or DLC can be used to create an overpowered unit and thus a juggernaut. And so having this easy and boring way of beating the game may not be desirable. And to elaborate on why using a juggernaut may not be very fun, oftentimes all you need to do is put them on a fort and watch them kill everyone on an enemy phase, meaning you don't have to make any actual decisions in this strategy game. And as a result, many Fire Emblem games have anti-juggernauting mechanics that are specifically designed so that you can't beat the game just by having a single strong unit kill everyone on enemy phase. Some games might have status effects that work independently of your unit stats and are very debilitating, such as sleep or berserk stabs that can cause you to lose control of even your strongest characters, which is mainly a feature of Fire Emblem Fire Thracia 776 with its infinite range, permanent duration, sleep and
place. Non, c'est pas pareil. Le seul point sur lequel des mecs avec des casques en papier alu, le meuble pointu. À droite. À droite. Déjà, je rêve toi avec un guidon, mais je parle pas de celle-là, je parle des émissions un peu plus récentes. Déjà.
A flat 80% hit rate independent of your avoid. Although there are workarounds, the purpose of these mechanics are to make sure that you're not invincible against every single type of enemy, or at least to make it more difficult to do so. Sometimes the limiting factor is the final boss of the game, which in some cases is so strong that standard juggernauts are not capable of fighting them, meaning that you'll need a specific boss killing setup or multiple units to beat the game. Some games also have you forcibly split up into multiple parties, meaning that one single unit cannot accomplish everything on the map. Though the only game that does this in a way that cannot be circumvented is Fire Emblem 5, where you literally cannot beat the game if you have less than 6 units. And another feature unique to Fire Emblem 5 is a minimum deployment, where you are forced to bring a minimum number of characters to every map, meaning that you will have to protect them. And if you don't and decide to juggernaut anyway, then you will suffer casualties, a penalty for using only one unit. And for another Fire Emblem 5 specific feature, maybe you might be starting to see a trend. Fatigue is a mechanic that stops you from deploying units that have done too many actions in the previous map. So unless you want to spend some rare and limited resource to restore their fatigue, you'll have to cycle through your army, and sometimes maps are designed specifically such that you have to defend your lore or some other objective in a way that stopping them with only one character is nearly impossible. And so doing so often requires training and developing a well-rounded army. Sometimes the enemy AI is smart enough to not attack if they have no hope of doing damage, the idea being that they'll move past them to attack your more vulnerable units. But mostly this tends to actually make things more tedious, because if you only bring your juggernaut, then the enemies will just sit there passive on the map without doing anything. In some games, like FE5 and FE12, the stat caps are rather low, reducing the possibility of runaway stat growth that can allow your player characters to be vastly more powerful than enemy units, and thus reduce the possibility of creating a juggernaut. And sometimes the resources that you need to get into an invincible state are limited, meaning that you cannot use them to trivialize the whole game. And so you might think that juggernauting is a bad thing for Fire Emblem's game design, because it is a useful tactic that people will use, but by using it, the game kind of ceases to be a strategy game and simply becomes an RPG. You stop needing to make decisions and you can just pound the enemies into the ground with higher stats. Being able to win with just one unit devalues a lot of the other important aspects of the game, such as developing an army or using interesting tactics or strategies, which is why many Fire Emblem games have mechanics specifically designed to prevent this. So now the question is, if it's so bad, then why do people do it? If it's so unfun, then surely people would pick the option that is more fun, right? The unfortunate fact is that in a lot of the cases, juggernauting is actually one of the least bad options that a player can pick. In games like Fire Emblem 9 Maniac Mode or Fire Emblem Awakening Lunatic Mode, you're really not missing out on that much by having one guy kill everything. In cases where maps are too open, enemies are too mobile, and weaker units are too vulnerable to even contribute anything, then having one guy kill everything seems like a much more attractive option. Especially since training one super unit is much easier than training 10 to 12 units up to the standard of the map, which in some cases can get quite ridiculous on higher difficulties. Though juggernauting or just having one guy kill everything is not always bad, especially on lower difficulties where gameplay isn't the focus. And in some cases, constructing your invincible unit can actually be very fun as a sort of win condition, as a reward for interacting well with the game's skill systems. If you understand the mechanics, it can be fun to construct a broken character that just wins the game. Though in those cases, it's only really fun if doing so is not trivially easy. And the simple fact, unfortunately, is that every Fire Emblem game has juggernauting to some degree. Even the harder games like Fire Emblem 12 and Conquest have segments where having one guy kill everything everything is a good strategy, but I think it's important that in those cases it's not something that you can beat the game with, and you'll still need a separate plan to beat Medius in FE12 and Takubi in Conquest. The reason why Juggernauting is kind of boring is because it's kind of brain dead, but if it's only temporary and you're forced to plan for the future anyway, then well, it's not that bad. There are a lot of Fire Emblem games where Juggernauting is a very easy strategy to execute because of the game's mechanics. For instance, in Fire Emblem 4, a lot of the first generation can be soloed by Sigurd, and a lot of the second can be handled by Seliph alone. The GBA Fire Emblems are notorious enemy phase fests, where you can just have one strong character, have 40 javelins, and kill everything. And the same can be said for the Tellus games, which suffer from the same symptoms. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon might be a bit of a strange pick for this list because the way that most people play, it's a very player phase oriented game, but at the same time it's also a game where a generic general with 30 defense and basically no other stats can handle the entire game just because most enemies can't even damage him. Fire Emblem Awakening on Lunatic difficulty is notoriously mainly completed by using Nosferatu and Robin because other alternatives are even more tedious. Fire Emblem Fate's Birthright and Revelation don't really make many attempts to counteract Juggernauting because they aren't meant to be very challenging experiences. And Fire Emblem Three Houses has such high stat caps that creating an extremely powerful unit that kills everything is not only possible but very reasonable. Only Fire Emblem games that I can think of that have tried to implement anti-Juggernauting mechanics are probably among the harder ones in this series, though the degree to which they succeed is highly variable. Fire Emblem 5 has a lot of mechanics that probably wouldn't fly today due to being extremely scuffed, but it really does force you to use a lot of units. And Fire Emblem 12's endgame is basically balanced around having units at their stat caps. Fire Emblem Fate's Conquest is probably one of the most difficult Fire Emblem games, and has so many anti-Juggernauting mechanics to the point where it interferes a lot with normal gameplay. And Fire
Unit customizability and wide open chapter layout for the most part are that there's no one true way to play the game. There's no ranking system and no PvP. And so depending on how any given player wants to complete the game, they will value different things. This made compiling a short list, which ended up being 10, a little longer to do than I thought. Are you a challenge runner like an LPC, or want to complete the game as fast as possible? What about modding your Switch for a very niche 0% growth run to see what is truly broken? Do you just want to see the world burn on enemy phase and have everyone die immediately? Or do you like playing safe and non-committal on player phase? Or do you want to run more risky, low HP dependent setups? Or is your goal to get the biggest, stupidest damage numbers ever? All of these different ways to accomplish the same thing in beating the game mean making use of different mechanics and abilities and setups the game can offer you. The goal of this video is to list off 10 that, if you happen to play like what I mentioned above, there is a high likelihood that you have used them to accomplish that goal. It is thanks to combinations of these 10 that allow players to easily one-round KO every non-monster boss, low turn clear every monster, and even win on maddening with no growths whatsoever. Be warned though, at the end of this video, you may never look at Three Houses the same way ever again. There is a lot of incredibly broken tools in this game, and if there's something I didn't mention, it's because I like rounding things off to 10, and if we listed everything really good in Three Houses, we'd probably be here forever. I opted not even to order this because, viewer, there are some things in life that are just not worth the trouble. The implications to rank Broken Thing 1 over Broken Thing 2 in a 5-year-old sandbox game are dire, and I don't want that smoke. I'm already cramming my mind to read comments that start with, "I'm surprised you didn't mention," or "I would argue that." In fact, the only thing I'm ordering in this video is a nice hearty meal from the sponsor of today's video, Food Devils. Food Devils is a game being developed as expeditions to your new demonic phase. Raging Storm. Edelgard is arguably the best character in the entire game. She may not have as many pure stats as Dimitri, but she has a combination of more optimal boons and banes, can access Pegasus Knight, and access certain abilities quicker than her royal counterparts. And just when you thought maybe Dimitri could outclass Edelgard with some time skip shenanigans, the devs gave her Emir, and Emir gives her Raging Storm, the most game-ending skill in all of Three Houses. I say game-ending in particular, because if you value just beating a route, nothing comes close to Emir in tandem with Warp and Dance strats. At the cost of 4 weapon uses, and being a Wyvern Rider or Wyvern Lord, making use of her Axe Boon and support like the Stride Gambit, Edelgard gets to cruise from one enemy to another, and in the case of monsters and Rhea herself, attacking the same enemy multiple times. It is true that Emir's 20 uses is a limitation, and the only material that repairs it is Agarthium, something only droppable by Titanesses and Sandworms. The thing is, Chapter 16 gives you 2 full repairs as a reward, effectively giving Raging Storm 10 total uses for only 6 chapters. With the right combination, Crimson Flower is basically over the moment it starts. If your goal isn't cheesing the entire route, then it's still ridiculous, but nothing in the game single-handedly trivializes the journey to complete a route. The only things that hold Raging Storm back is the fact that it's only available for 6 chapters in one route, as well as that Raging Storm needs support from other completely cheesy and broken stuff on the list. Vengeance. Vengeance is learned early by Dedue, Bernadetta, and Cyril, giving it multiple times more availability than Raging Storm, and it is single-handedly the most unfairly broken player face attack button in the game if your express purpose is to delete any enemy that isn't a monster. Vengeance has an extremely simple formula. Add max HP minus current HP to attack. Unlike what one may expect, the added damage is not scaled down to some random equation. If you have max 30 HP and your current HP is 10, you just get 20 true damage. But when you consider stacking HP and skills that boost damage, that 20 extra damage becomes a lot more broken than it already is. Its effectiveness is exemplified in challenge runs because it demonstrates that in a 0% growth run, which in other words means a character will never gain stats via leveling, Cyril, as demonstrated, using War Master bases and support bonuses alone, can one-hit KO Edelgard at her last remaining bar with gigantic bonus damage and a crit rate so high it would make Rutger blush. Because this even has the hilarious added bonus of plus 10 crit, which gives Cyril an over 100% crit as War Masters. This even works for a character that can't access War Master like Bernadetta. Bernadetta can, using her base stats alone, one-hit KO every single non-boss monster in the whole entire game, with the exception of Dedue in Chapter 17 of Crimson Flower, who has enough bulk to not die immediately. Thanks to the minimum base stats of Paladin, 32 HP and 19 strength, plus Lance Mastery, and their class skill Lancefair, she just clears any human in the game regardless of difficulty. This skill is completely absurd thanks to its 1-to-1 true hit bonus, and no other combat art comes close to giving this much raw damage. What the hell? Some may be averse to Vengeance due to its HP threshold requirement and the need to be at literally 1 HP to make the most of it, but you would be very surprised at how creative you can be to get to 1 HP, using Guard Adjutant, more on this later, Miracle Gambits, self-inflicted damage like Lava Tiles, or in the case of Cyril and Dedue, Hero's Relics. On top of that, maintaining this HP without dying is actually much easier than you would think because Assassin and Trickster exists. Class any 3 of these into them, get to 1 HP, have literally anyone else around for stealth to activate, and I'm not kidding you, you will never die. Congratulations, you've now created the Stealth Bomber. No way I can lose here. Hunter's Volley. Hunter's Volley is really strong once it's finally acquired. This art, mastered by the Sniper class, turns an otherwise limited class, or a unit lagging behind in killing potency, into a delete button on player phase, giving the Brave effect to skip enemy retaliation to attack twice, being extended at range 2 to 3, which means 3 to 4 thanks to bow range +1, and giving +1 might and 15 hit alongside snipers having bow fair. It makes the user able to deal massive damage reliably. There are many flyers in this game, and Maddening provides enemies with speed stats so high that doubling may be completely in instances like this, a high accuracy, instant double move at 4 range becomes extremely valuable to pick off enemies with ease. It also greatly bolsters the range of snipers to begin with. They are footlocked at 5 move, but in spite of this, their threat range is 9 times. That range is really non-committal, extended long-range options in this game are balanced by being unable to double, having low accuracy, and having uses. Hunter's Volley has 0 of those obstacles. There is almost never a reason not to use Hunter's Volley when you have it. Perhaps a curved shot is more appropriate for a situation. The irony is that the real balancing around Hunter's Volley isn't in the art itself, it's in the class. Sniper kind of sucks otherwise. It's a footlocked class that provides a paltry 1 strength and 0 speed. You need Hunter's Volley to double on Maddening. What's more is that as a class mastery skill, you have to commit to grinding 150 or 75 rounds of combat with max statues in a really mediocre class. Sniper is like the est of 3 houses, and depending on who you ask, that's not a good thing. Once you have it, it immediately provides incredible and reliable killing throughout the entire game from that point.
Yes, I got you! Vernon's unstoppable.
Battalion Vantage and Battalion Wrath. Dimitri is particularly broken because he's the only character in the game that has access to both these battalion skills at the same time. Battalion Vantage is a passive ability that allows the user to always attack first if their battalion's HP is less than a third of their max. Wrath is the same thing, but grants 50 critical hit if the foe initiates combat. They're both enemy phase abilities, but stacked together, Dimitri gets 50 crit and attacks first.
Well.
Letting Dimitri take some battalion damage till he hits his threshold. You can also just not.
No, this is probably because you don't.
These skills being tied to battalions.
But that's what.
At full HP as well. So give Dimitri this plus retribution, and as remove.
Oh, fuck! I should follow to do that.
To just instantly almost everything that tries to attack him. The major weakness of this strategy is against monsters, as they have very high HP, multiple bars, and barriers that have damage. Also, gambits are uncounterable, but besides that, good luck, enemies. This is yet another combination of skills that are so overtuned that they break the game's difficulty.
Oh yeah.
Quite literally designed to kill every last one of them.
Yeah.
I swear it wasn't in here.
Stealth. As I've done research for this video, I've come to the conclusion that stealth is, well, stealthily overpowered. Pun intended, I don't care. Coming in as a class skill on both assassins and tricksters, this ability prevents enemies from targeting the user only unless there is no one else for that enemy to target, barring some weird enemy reinforcement exceptions that come up extremely rarely, but that's not important. The flavor text for this ability is completely wrong, perhaps in a vain attempt to hide the implications of how broken this actually is. This skill, ironically, makes the Assassin an extremely useful support unit for rally or gambit botting with Stride, Impregnable Wall, Retribution, or anything else you want. They can follow along other units without any concern of dying at all. As you can see in this example, Ignatz is rallying Cyril while being in range of several units who can easily one-round KO him, but will target a max HP and max defense Dimitri instead. Like I mentioned before, this also works incredibly well with Cyril, Dedue, and
So
Bernard. It is extremely versatile and very easy